So once we understand that data is everywhere, every decision you make is going to have some level of data. We don't want to be misinformed. We don't want to look on the news. We don't want to look in current events. We don't want to see charts that look like they're saying something when, because we don't have the skills to question them, we don't go that way. And at the end of the day, it's not a technical skill. Data literacy is not technical. It's critical thinking. It's questioning.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you all to Kevin Hanegan. Kevin is the Chief Learning Officer at a great company called Click, which we're going to find out about. He's also a author of a very, very important book called Turning Data into Wisdom. So I'm really excited to have you today because learning is a passion of mine, right? So when you apply learning to performance management at a company, you have a wonderful marriage. Welcome aboard, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this and love the learning aspect of this. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. Kevin, I'm used to having a lot of tech folks on my show, chief technology officers, product folks, AI experts, but this is great because you've got a very interesting story. You studied computer science and mathematics, if I remember correctly from our last conversation. Somehow
Correct.
You get into a chief learning role and an author of this stuff. So I'd love to start with your journey, Kevin. Like, where did you start off and how did you end up in this role and as an author and a chief learning officer at Click?
Yeah, I'll start, like you said, I was computer science and math in my undergrad and tech geek, still like computers, love technology. I do have to say it was a little annoying when I would learn programming languages and then like the next year they're obsolete and then they're moving on to other ones. So right out of school, I started getting a few jobs doing consulting, but I kind of had two aha moments. And the first one was I realized that, I like, the technical skills. I kind of had a knack for teaching. I was taking some courses at night and the teacher was sick for prolonged absence. I think she had like pneumonia or something. And I can't remember how it happened, but I subbed in and the students were like, wow, you can, talk technical to the layman, which I guess is a really good skill. At the time, I didn't realize. But then it got me thinking exactly, more so than ever, because technology is growing faster and faster. And I've just expanded that out. After that, I had kids. I have 4 kids. My oldest one has special needs, and it's not a computer language, but he speaks a different language, and so it's important that I can like translate that. And it just got me thinking, my God, there's so much stuff going out there with data and technology, and we're still prone to bias. We're prone to assumptions. We're prone to failure to communicate and listen. That it's an urgent need. So I started taking jobs more on the education side, the learning side, the data side. That got me to where I am today.
Nice. How does your dual background in computer science mathematics influenced your approach to organization learning and development?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing is, and I don't want to stereotype organizations, but there's different buckets. There's organizations will say, okay, what are the latest tech trends? We have to take classes on AI. We have to take classes on visual analytics. We have to take courses on machine learning. And then there are other ones that will be overboard on company culture and communication and storyboarding and those things. And I don't find that many organizations marry them together. And what I mean by that is you can have organizations that teach data science, but those data scientists still need to learn how to check the balances to train their models. They still need to learn how to actively listen to people to get the requirements right. And on the flip side, those people that are more of the soft skill focus, if they're doing communication, they usually need to still be able to understand the tech jargon enough. Or what we call data literacy is you might not be doing the statistical result, but if someone gives you an analysis, you still have to critique it and evaluate it. What does it mean? Does it mean there's a correlation or a causation? And so, while most organizations drive those tent poles straightforward, let's teach the technology, let's teach the soft skills, they don't integrate the two together. And I think that's where my perspective is. It's great to learn a programming language, but I still need to learn how to talk to other people in order to do my job.
How do you find your role helps you transform organizations? Because it's not common that companies have a chief learning officer. It's really unique, and I love that because it means that Click is definitely focused on employee engagement, employee growth, learning and development and all that. Why do they do this, and how do you use your role to transform your organization?
I think the reason we did it is we're realizing the world is changing so fast, data is coming everywhere, that there's a lot of talk about the skills gap that's coming. Is, AI is not going to take over the world, but we have automation, which is going to take some jobs, and it requires those individuals then to reskill on jobs that relate to that. So maybe you're not doing the data entry, but you're doing the analysis. And I think Click realizes it's what we do with our customers, but internally, we have to do this upskilling. A lot of the skills that are relevant now, I hate to say it, but you don't learn them in college. You don't learn them in universities. You probably have to go back and get a continuous learning degree, or at the same time, it's just better to do it within the organization you're working for, because then you can give the context related to how it impacts our organization. So I think at Click, we realized that we need everyone to be data literate. We need everyone to learn these tools that are not going away. What better way than to in-house it, as opposed to, sending people bespoke programs here and there, which is still valuable. But there's better economies of scale of doing it all in-house.
How do you turn these learning and development organizations that you lead from a cost center to a high performing unit that actually drives revenue in an organization?
The $1 million question, right? So for years, education has always been, okay, what are the objectives? What's the ROI? And it's always been really hard indirectly to show that. I mean, you can show people liked the training, you can show that they scored well on the assessment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've actually transferred the skills enough to change their behavior. Are they using it in their sales calls? Are they using it in their day-to-day job? One of the benefits of having both the technical and the soft skills side, again, marrying the two, is we can come up with objectives that are tied to the organization's bottom line. So we need to go out and learn more about generative AI. How is it going to help us in our organization? The beauty of that is we can now build educational programs that are married to that learning objective. Now, the old saying, correlation doesn't equal cost. I can't say that when those campaigns that we run using generative AI are wildly successful, they're 100% due to our education. But I can say that if we didn't have the education, they wouldn't have the skills to do that. So we're lucky enough that we can come early on in the phase of organizational transformation to provide the education, which is critical. I think that's the key takeaway, is if you can get involved early on, you can make a claim that this is really fundamental. Whereas if you're kind of the cherry on the top, a lot of times they're going to say, hey, it's just training. That's the first thing that we'll cut from the budget.
I can see that. Because it's a cost, right? You speak and write on data literacy and decision intelligence. Tell us why that's such a passion of yours, and why it's even important. Let's say a listener doesn't run a technical company. How is this still relevant to them, to a mid-level employee?
I think that's kind of the challenge. The name data literacy and decision intelligence, they sound technical. And that's probably the problem, because I'll talk to, let's say, for the average 100 people that I talk to, as soon as I open my mouth and I say data, I don't even get to literacy. They're like, checked out, time out. No, I'm not a data guy. I'm not a data lady. I'm done. To better understand and answer that question, data is everywhere. So have you ever looked at a review on Amazon before you bought a product? Like I just bought a coffee pot a while ago. I had to look and see the reviews. Now, those reviews are qualitative, but they're still data. Now, hypothetically, if the first review said, this is the worst coffee pot in the world, don't buy it, I wish I could give negative stars, what do most of us do? Most of us, just human nature, is I say, okay, let's look at the next one. But the next coffee pot, my question would be, okay, well, what was their criteria? Maybe they wanted a coffee pot that had high volume, and this is a 1 cup. Maybe they wanted one that was, they wanted variety. They wanted to do iced coffee and hot coffee, and this was not. So that question, that answer to me, that feedback, wasn't enough to answer my question. So I go to the next one, and our brains don't work like that. We see a negative response, like, oh, not for me, time out. It's kind of teaching us that critical thinking approach of working with the data. So once we understand that data is everywhere, every decision you make is going to have some level of data. We don't want to be misinformed. We don't want to look on the news. We don't want to look in current events. We don't want to see charts that look like they're saying something, when, because we don't have the skills to question them, we don't go that way. And at the end of the day, it's not a technical skill. Data literacy is not technical. It's critical thinking. It's questioning. It's understanding very basic math that if you can understand a denominator from like second grade, you can be data literate. There's no technical skills involved. But again, the name puts people off, I think.
I actually agree with you, Kevin. I don't know if you and I spoke about this offline or not, but about a month ago, we did a 10X conference with my company. And what we did is one of the things we were focused on is 10X decision making and how letting go 80% of the stuff that they do, including the clients that they work with, could 10X their career. And we did a very thorough data analysis and we presented it to them because what was happening is people were saying, yeah, but that client we've driven revenue with. We were like, great, let's see how much time you spent to drive that very little revenue. And people were shocked with the data that we put up. Talking about data literacy, for the first time ever, they saw it in their face of these wonderful clients, how much time and effort we had put in for that very little revenue, and what we could have done instead with that time. So I think it's huge. We're a tech services organization. We're not a pure technical company, but so they don't get too much data fed to them, but understanding how their time and effort is wasted in certain places was mind-blowing to some of the staff members. It was very powerful. How do you ensure in your role currently, in any role you've had, an executive role, how do you ensure that the learning strategies are aligned with the overall business goals and strategies, and how do you measure their effectiveness?
Absolutely. I guess I'll even start by saying that you need to make sure the organization has a strategy and goals. And I say that half jokingly, but there are times that I'll work with organizations where, their goal will be let's hit this revenue number, which is fine, but that's not really a strategy, right? That's an outcome. And we can talk about leading indicators, lagging indicators, but working a lot with these organizations, we want to take a step back and actually really understand so we'll start with like a strategic analysis, a basic example of a SWOT, and all of that information, that's data. It's just qualitative, right? But gathering that together and then realizing, okay, how do we turn our weaknesses into strengths? How do we turn our threats into opportunities? We're coming up with strategic alternatives, but it needs to align to the organization. So for example, if we're in like a bear market and I'm trying to downsize and I'm doing a consolidation play, then my goals aren't going to be about growth and revenue and headcount expansion. Or if I'm trying to take out the market and displace a competitor, all my goals are going to be around those. So we kind of have to have those principal foundational discussions first. From there, we're going to do at the highest level, if it's a big strategic decision, we want to do a skills map. What are the different competencies that are needed to achieve these outcomes? And where do we have those competencies in bulk at an organization, and where are we lacking? And I will tell you, 7, maybe even 8 out of 10 times when we do this on a heat map and we show red for deficiencies and green for, you have a lot of skills, majority of them are soft skills that are lacking across different projects.
In a technical company, Kevin, or all companies that you've seen?
Every company that I work with, which is not all, every company's digital, but not every company's digital. Most are digital, but they're not all tech companies. They could be customer service companies or so forth. It's always the same ones because you think about it, we don't learn them in school. Even systems thinking, you were talking about 10x, our brains are designed to think linearly. We don't think exponentially like 10x. So we have to build them a course on that. That is a skill course. That's not a technical course, right? They think about, okay, here's my role. I'm in marketing. I'm going to do my job and my goal is build lead gen. And they don't think about, am I going to do it in a way that displaces another part, not displaces, but affects another part of the system inappropriately. So we have to teach about systems thinking and the light bulbs when you do those foundational trainings on like systems thinking, exponential thinking, foresight. It's just all of a sudden things start flowing. But I think that's where the bottleneck is they don't connect those. And we don't get trained on them in universities or, in primary or secondary school.
Kevin, you go into a company, whether it's as a full-time or a consultant or an advisor role, and someone like me, a founder of a company, a visionary, says, Kevin, I want my people to get better. I want you to create a learning program here. What are the 3 things you're gonna ask me or tell me that I need to do before you could create something?
Yep, I'll start with the end and move back to it. The first thing I'm going to tell them is you need to make this a strategic imperative. And what I mean by that is you need to put your time where your mouth is and say you have to tell your team that you're going to dedicate X amount of hours per month to this. This is not something that we're going to build and you're going to say do after hours, do on the weekend, do, it's got to be built in, because when you're doing that, you're trying to change the culture. You're trying to make it a high impact learning culture. And you can't do that by saying this is important, but do it on your own time. So it's got to be baked into it. And the amount of times that stops the conversation where they're like, well, we have this release next week. We have these 20 bugs. They're already working like 50 hours a week. I can commit, to saying maybe they can spend 30 minutes every 2 weeks. You got to walk away at that point because they're not ready mentally to be at that point. So that's almost like the question that I'll use to just, open the door. If they're not ready there, then it's okay if they answer that way, but if they don't want to change, we could build $1 million training program that's going to not do anything. Once you get through that, I think what I'm going to ask is, what are your strategic goals? What are your organizational goals? Because, like I mentioned, most companies are digital, and there is an assumption I have that a lot of people are not ready for the digital world. And so there could be process training, there could be soft skill training, there could be technical training, but I want to understand what their strategic goals are. I want to understand what their measurement framework is, not just the lagging indicators, but the leading indicators, where they are on the spectrum of, red versus green. And I'll come back to them with a plan that says, again, competencies. These are the competencies I think we can improve. This is how we're going to do it. And that's where we get into the debates of, do you do it all through self-paced learning? Do you have face-to-face workshops? How are we going to do this? Are we going to do an event where we take people out for a week straight? And there's obviously perfect answers and there's imperfect answers, but some work better than others. But we'll get into that discussion at that point. So the time allotment. But again, it's your goals. How do we align with them? Let's do a competency mapping. And to your point of how do we measure the effectiveness? I think if we have baseline data, it's a lot easier to show improvement and relate that to us. If there's no baseline data before we do that, if there's no competency map that shows all the red, and then after the fact, there's a little bit of green, it's hard to show the from to. That helps when you have the baseline for the learning and for the strategy goals.
Kevin, it reminds me of almost like if I wanted to get in shape, right? You would probably want to measure where my body fat is, what my weight is, what my goals are, and then, hey, how much time can you spend at the gym? If the answer is once a week for half an hour, you're probably like, oh no, this isn't going to work, man. You're not ready for this, right? So you have to really be ready to truly throw your team into a true performance learning development organization.
Absolutely. And the curveball to that is, if I'm doing that with a physical trainer or whatever, the other question that I might ask, which is unrelated to exercise, is what's your nutrition and what's your sleep? And are you willing to change those? And so in an organization, it might be, okay, are you willing to commit this time, but are you also open to, do you have a growth mindset? How do you believe about those things? Can adults learn and change? Are you, as leaders in the organization, willing to show that this is important to you and actually do it? And that's where going sideways a little bit, most of the time it fails, is they're ready, but we don't have the buy-in from like the middle leadership. And those are the people that are the directs of our individual contributors. If they're not aligned, it doesn't matter if the CEO is.
I like it. Can you share your insights on the role of psychology in learning and development and how it could be leveraged to enhance organizational performance?
Yeah, huge. I have 4 kids. The 3 things I don't mandate a lot, but the 3 things I always said they need to do. They need to study abroad because you need to get different cultures.
Wow.
I think I used to say they need to learn Photoshop, but nowadays there's so much AI that can replace that because you need the creative, and you need to take a psychology course. Because if you cannot interact with other people, if you cannot understand why they're doing things, and again, I have the benefit of one of my kids as mental health issues. So the things that they say is completely outside of my mental model. I had to learn why they're saying it. And a lot of times they're not saying it to be rude or to be aggressive or derogatory. It's their view on the world. And then I had this moment with business. Oh my God, when the leaders say this and that, if I don't understand why they're doing it, I can't help them, because I'm going to answer a symptom and not the root cause. So psychology to me is the most important leadership skill you can have other than creativity and seeing the world with the culture. But everyone needs to understand what makes people tick. If you're in a meeting when we're all been there and someone's talking very monotone and slow and spend 60 minutes to say something that's 5 minutes and they don't read the room, when people are going like this or they're pulling their hair out or they're fidgeting, I know that's probably an easy example, but psychology helps you go deep and find the examples that aren't that visible of what makes people tick. So can't stress it enough.
Huge. You have to truly understand your team to be able to truly train them in a way that resonates with them, right? Because if they don't care,
Absolutely.
they've already checked out before they walked in.
Yes.
Kevin, you're in so many different ways. You're potentially you're a professor, I believe. You write books. You're corporate learning development officer. What's like the most challenging management project you've ever been involved with, where it had you pulling out your hair, and potentially even had you reconsider doing this? And what did you do about it to get it back on track?
I think that I have an easy answer. I have to think a little bit what I did, but anytime we're doing an organizational strategic shift, like digital transformation, when things started going more to subscription based as opposed to selling things for, perpetual or similar. And the reason I would say that is because in order to do it well, everyone needs to be on the same page. And if anyone follows or any of the business models, a lot of those cases, your key objectives, like your EBITDA, your revenue, are going to dip before they go back up. It's like you got to tell people, hey, this is going to go down. Unfortunately, human emotion psychology, people see things that go down. What they do is they make rash decisions to try to fix it. So long story short, the situation was we were trying to change our organization strategically, and we knew that some of the metrics needed to change, but it was really hard for teams to change their current approach, that kind of outdated mental model. I am a big fan of something called unlearning, which is what I tried to use to fix it. I always give this analogy. Again, I have 4 kids. They say why until it drives me crazy. It's like, why? But then I was like, well, why are they saying why? And it's because their brains are empty. They don't know, and they want to fill it up. They're naturally curious. As you get older, all of our experiences, whether we don't remember them or not, they're in our long-term memory. The brain's getting full as we get older. And so we stop asking why because we think we know the answer.
Yep.
And so if we think we know the answer, we're going to go with that. But unlearning is about going deep into the brain and taking those things out that are irrelevant anymore. Like you switch from perpetual to subscription. Let's unlearn perpetual and let's relearn subscription. Because if you don't do that, you're going to make unconscious decisions where your brain is still answering in a perpetual world or in a non-digital world. And it's hard to do that. It takes dedicated focus, certain training classes, workshops. But if anyone doesn't kind of believe in that concept of unlearning, I'd have them go on Google and type in the backwards bicycle. And if you've ever seen that experiment. I was a psychologist, changed the bicycle. So when you steer left, it goes right. And you steer right, it goes left. He got on it, fell off miserably, went in front of an audience and was going to pay someone like $1,000 if they could ride it. No one could ride it. So then he thought, interesting, how long will it take me to learn to ride this? And he tried riding it, I think 45 minutes for a day, for every day. It took him close to half a year to learn it. What was interesting is that night he got on a regular bicycle, couldn't ride it anymore. But you have a kid who's never ridden a bike, they learn the backwards bike much quicker. It's because they don't have to unlearn. His brain had to unlearn that left means right and right means left. And that was the moral of the story. Is it took him 6 months and he was consciously unlearning. We're doing in business all the time without trying to do it consciously. It's like we're going to say, okay, let's learn this new thing. Let's learn this new thing. Let's learn this new thing. Never saying, okay, well, we got to unlearn these old things too and make time for them. And that when they say that, I say, go to the backwards bike because, the data doesn't lie. It was fascinating.
That's really brilliant, Kevin. I haven't heard that concept. One of the things years ago, I was part of a think tank group called Vistage. You might have heard of it. It's a global organization. I don't know if it was our group that came up with this or it was an existing one, but at Vistage, we question our answers, right? So we come in with a bunch of stuff in our head. We know all the answers, but we're going to question those versus answering questions. That's one that came to mind. Second one that I agree with you, Kevin, is throughout the years when I hired folks, so we run a technology recruiting and consulting firm at HireCloud, right? That's one of the businesses. And when we hired veterans, that were transactional minded, when we told them how we're different and we're relationship focused, they loved hearing that. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. It should be done that way. My firm doesn't do it that way. Currently, the problem was unlearning what they had learned proved to be extremely difficult. And these are
Yeah.
wonderful people and they had skills, right? It's not like they were bums. They might have had 6 years of experience. The challenge is going from a transactional mindset to a more relationship based sounded good to them, but they couldn't unlearn their transactional ways and they would get frustrated because they were successful, in a role that they were able to do what the way they did it always. So it took minimum of 1 year for them to unlearn what we would call
Wow.
bad habits, right?
Yep.
And minimum 1 year. And only, I would say, about 25% actually worked out long term, where they were able to unlearn some of those wrong ways they were doing business to learn what we consider the right way to do business, the relationship driven process. And it was exhausting versus the person who was riding a bike for the first time. So I brought
Yep.
in junior folks or folks that had never done the business, built them from scratch, taught them the right way from the beginning, and it just became their second nature. Wow, the unlearning process put kind of a tag on what we've been frustrated with for years. Because we kept going back and forth. No more senior people; they're too stubborn. No more junior people; they take too long to develop. And so, what I've learned, it's really the person and the
Yep.
experience they come from and their mindset, and how quickly they can unlearn and learn the new ways. Unlearn the old ways and learn the new ways.
Exactly. Spot on. It's about the mindset. And it's just about there's another group, right? There's the people that are, quote unquote stuck in the ways it's hard. There's the newer people, but you have to spend all the time getting up to speed. There's the group in the middle, which unfortunately I think a lot of people focus on in the sweet spot. The problem with that is it's hard for them to innovate. It's the people that have done the same thing for 50 years. And now you're asking them to come in, okay, you're hitting the process, but we want to evolve. We want to innovate. And it's hard for them to innovate because they've been literally doing the same thing. And that's kind of that, you hire people from the same companies over and over again because the ramp up time's short. But I
Yes.
think the higher shelf, the ceiling is lower because they're not innovating.
That's actually dead on. You're absolutely right. Kevin, in turning data into wisdom, you present a 6-phase, 12-step process to help organizations make data-driven decisions. Tell me a little bit about that, about the evolution of data literacy and inform the creation of this process.
Yeah, well, I think in general, anytime there's a systematic process, it helps people, especially even in unlearning, right? If you have a process written down that's codified, it's a lot easier to follow it than if it's just kind of up in the air. It helps with that. And then it's also systemic. What I mean by that is it thinks about unintended consequences. It thinks about the technical side and the soft side. And so the process, interesting enough, working in data does not start with the data. It starts with a decision. And I think that's where most organizations fail is they say, here's my data dump for my marketing campaign. Go find me some insights. And you're like on a wild goose chase. It's a needle in a haystack. You have to say, what is the decision? Up front, you have to understand the decision criteria. What's the risk? What are the constraints? What does good look like? Before you even go into finding the data, because if you go all the way down, the chances are you're going to come up with a great insight that has nothing to do with your organization that you can't act on and potentially even harms the organization. So the model is like a flipped decision model. Start with the decision to be made, question to be asked, find the relevant data, looking at both qualitative and quantitative data, do the right analytics. But then after you get the insight, the key is check it for bias, check it to validate the assumptions are accurate, get different perspectives, understand if there's any logical fallacies involved, and then it goes on to making the decision and communicating it. But a lot of organizations forget that validation process. They forget that it might be prone to bias or they might have an incorrect assumption. The analytics might be right, but an assumption could be wrong.
Nice. Is there any real life examples from your case studies in your book that an organization significantly benefit from applying the principles outlined in it to grow revenue, to grow EBITDA, to increase their company assets mentally and physically?
Absolutely. And I'll share a couple. I'll share a personal story in a second as well, because I think sometimes it helps resonate how it impacts not just business, but personal. But we have studies where because the organization is answering the question to be answered up front, the decision, they're saving the all of the time doing analysis on a needle in a haystack. They have improved decision efficiency by close to, it was like 60 or 70% just by following the process. By On the flip side, we have other case studies where people are adding the validation process, checking for bias. In that case, it might slow the decision process down a little bit because you're getting different perspectives. But at the same time, it improved, I forget how it was calculated, but improved the efficiency and the effectiveness of the decision by twofold, meaning they weren't going back and saying, oh, this was a bad decision, let's relearn from it. And I mentioned that validation process is critical. So I talked about my kids a couple of times, just a quick story to put that in perspective and put the value on it. My oldest, the one with mental health challenges, was having behaviors at school, punching, kicking, all these things. They were going to kick him out. They took data. The data was, here's like 26 behaviors in this week. And so I said, okay, well, I got to question it. Let me ask more data. What time of day? What day of the week? Because the theory was maybe it's right after lunch, maybe it's after recess, maybe it's Monday over a weekend. So they go back and they do it, and like, nope, still escalating. Doesn't seem like a pattern. And I turned to my wife and I'm like, I smiled. I said, I got this. So they built all these nice line charts and bar charts. They were about to expel him, which means from a money point of view, I'd probably have to buy a private education, which is really expensive. And one of the things in the data was it was the behavior, it's the antecedent, and the consequence. The consequence for like 95% of them was he was going to the principal's office. And the assumption they made was kids don't like going to the principal's office. I said, well, my son has autism. He loves going to the principal. So we called them in. Hey, how was it? Great, Dad. I kicked the teacher. Send me to the principal. She read for me for 45 minutes. I think I'm going to punch someone tomorrow and see if I can get 2 hours. All the teachers' jaws just dropped. And I said, it's okay. Like, you made an assumption. But when you talk about the value of that, that materially changed my son's life because now he was still in the school system. He didn't have to go change my financial life because I didn't have to pay for private schooling. And all of their data, all of their analysis was right. What was missing from the process is no one questioned, is the principal a deterrent? They just assumed it was. So if that happens in personal life, you better believe it happens in business every day for millions of dollars, where it's a subtle thing like an assumption.
That is brilliant. And it's so important because you're talking about kids, right? And
Yeah.
we forget, I don't know what your son's name is, Kevin, you're welcome to share it, but this gentleman's going to grow up and he's going to have an impact on the world, and a more positive one because of that small issue that you uncovered years ago.
Absolutely. Parker is, he's a genius, computer genius.
I bet.
To the extent hacks he does a lot of things he shouldn't do. He's probably on the CIA watch list, not for terrorism, but for being recruited because he's that good technically. But we just have to rein in the behaviors. But yeah, that saved his future. It saved us. So just in the process helped because I stopped and I said, okay, how could this data be right, but not accurate? And like you said, question the answer.
So you had to really slow down to uncover something that everybody was skipping across. I'm surprised they gave you so much data to work with.
It took a couple of meetings, and they didn't know my background, and they didn't know why I was asking. But the antecedent behavior consequence is a thing in schools when you have kids with that profile. It's pretty common to say, "Give me the ABC data," because they have to track toward goals. Are they progressing or not? I asked for the times of day, and I think at that point they wanted to help us, so it wasn't that hard for them to add it.
Wow. Kevin, what's a project you're really excited about taking on next?
Well, we have a website, Data Literacy Project, which is something that we're trying to make the world more data literate. I'm passionate about making sure people realize everything we talked about relates to them. They might not be doing it in a business. They might be doing it at home, like the Amazon example. Everyone in this digital world needs to understand data to make better decisions, but also for ethical things and to make sure that they understand their data privacy and data security. So anything I can do that helps educate people on data, how to use it for decisions and bias is great. Hopefully, we got a few more books coming down the line too, as well, similar to turning data into wisdom that just have more stories and more anecdotes.
Speaking of resources and books, as my listeners embark on this data literacy journey, whether it's for themselves or their kids, who would have thought that we can apply this to our own kids, right? What would be your top one or two pieces of advice and some specific resources or practices you would recommend they can start with today?
Other than learning, taking a psychology course, I think everyone, even parents, I think what would be really fascinating, there's a book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. everyone should read, because it ties to how the brain makes decisions and these heuristics, and how we see things in the outside and we assume that there's a reason for them, but it's the brain making shortcuts. So if we understand these heuristics, we're going to understand things like confirmation bias, which we all do. We're going to understand association bias, all of those things. So in terms of starting, I recommend everyone reads that book. It's not mine. I don't get any credit for it or royalties, but if you understand how the brain makes shortcuts, and it's incredibly an awesome computer, but flawed, limited, I should say, not flawed, we're going to think about our decisions much different. I think I can almost end there. That is the one book I'd recommend for everyone to read, because most of the time it's not because people don't want to understand this. It's because they don't know it's a thing. It's a lack of awareness. It goes over the different heuristics, like what confirmation bias is and why it happens and how it happens in the brain and what studies were done. And I think when you can put data behind it, people are like, okay, I understand it. But for every 1,000 people I train, I'm going to say there's probably 10% that think bias is voodoo, magic, not accurate. I don't have bias. I'm a nice person. And that mindset, you've got to get the awareness before you can actually educate them.
We all have biases. Kevin, how do people find you? Your awesome book, and how can they reach out to you if they need?
Yeah, I think so. I have a website I set up, turningdataintowisdom.com. It has the book, but it has trainings, articles, research papers, podcast links like these. So I'd go check it out. There's a link to my LinkedIn profile. If anyone wants to connect, happy to.
Amazing. Kevin, thank you so much for being here and sharing all your knowledge about data literacy and learning and development, all very, very important issues.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.